Okay, sorry.
Brilliant. Okay. Hi, everyone. We are GRID, Gaming Revolution for International Development. I am Mariam Adil, the founder of GRID.
And I'm Caroline Bailey, the content specialist for GRID.
International development is a global agenda. It's a big sector. So basically you have 12, since 1947, the World Bank alone has funded 12,000 projects in 173 countries. In 2014, their lending for projects was more than $40 billion.
However, between fiscal years 11 and 13, there were 30% of the World Bank projects that were rated unsatisfactory. This means that the projects are not delivering on the results that they promised. International development may not be working. To put it more nicely, development agencies are not seeing their return on investment.
Consensus is development projects might be suffering from what is called the last mile problem. It's such a big problem, they have a name for it. So what happens is that development agencies are doing everything that they can to make a project work, but they don't see the change that they want to see or that they expect to see. And therefore, they're suffering from this last mile problem. It means that the development agencies have done everything that they wanted to do, that they could do to make the development projects work, but they don't see the change that they expected to see. It's that last mile that results in the use of, and I hope I don't lose my punchline here, it results in the use of mosquito nets as fishing nets, toilet seats as flower pots, and condoms as balloon animals. Our customers have a problem. Yeah. Our customers have a problem. Their communication tools are not working. They're not raising the awareness. They're not inspiring the behavior change that they wanted to inspire. So basically, just like you saw in these examples, the mosquito nets, the toilet seats, and the condoms are not being used because our customers, the development agencies, are not able to communicate their benefits. They're suffering from the last mile problem. If they had been doing this right, they would not be still distributing pamphlets and brochures in villages and slums.
So what's the problem with using pamphlets in villages? Well, 1 out of 5 adults in the world are illiterate. 1 out of 5. That's 800 million adults, mostly in South Asia and Africa. So therefore, most of the beneficiaries of development projects can't read or don't want to read long, boring brochures.
So development agencies need communication solutions that have images, sounds, and are fun to engage with. And so, what has images, sounds, and is fun?
Games.
GRID is leveraging the power of digital games to solve the last mile problem, to raise awareness and inspire the behavioral change that we need to see.
The core GRID team is made up of international development practitioners, professional game developers, artists, and lawyers. Between the two of us, we have 7 years of international development experience and 13 countries under our belts. Our game developers have made over 100 games and apps for various international clients, including London Fashion Week. And we also have mentors from the World Bank, GW, and Google who support us in everything we do.
Since our inception in 2014, we've already completed 2 projects and games, Randomania and Steerowide. Randomania, the game, was built in partnership with the World Bank that simulates the challenges of designing and evaluating a development project. Steerowide, on the other hand, breaks stereotypes in a fun and engaging fashion. We're currently in partnership with Flock, an NGO, to break stereotypes that African American students face in low-income households. Between these 2 projects combined, we've already made $15,000 and reached 700 people in at least 20 countries.
So last year, we were focusing mainly on making training games for development practitioners, and they were super successful. However, through conversations with our clients, the World Bank, and others, we realized that there was a more pressing need, the last mile problem.
And therefore, we moved from training games to these beneficiary-focused games where we could raise awareness and inspire this behavioral change for the project beneficiaries. So now we're looking at social issues such as open defecation in India, global financial literacy in Africa, or even encouraging science and math education in a place like Gambia.
So through our conversations with our clients, the development agencies, we quickly realized that what they were willing to pay for these games went from tens of thousands of dollars to hundreds of thousands of dollars per project. For instance, we're currently in discussions with the Gambian government to make games for science, English, and math for secondary school students. So for 15 games in 3 subjects for 5 grades, that's $20,000 a game and ends up being $300,000, a massive project.
In March 2015, we had a very happy moment. We were selected amongst 5 out of 700 projects to be featured on stage at the Clinton Global Initiative University at a session moderated by President Clinton. That's me at the far end. And therefore, given this big boost, we've been able to get a lot of press coverage in Washington Post, VentureBeat, World Bank Today, GW Today, and soon NPR.
And from this boost, we are now able to write 2 proposals per month for new projects. So there are many other companies in this Games for Good space, and they've provided us with the validation we need to use games as tools for behavior change. However, many of these companies focus on users in the Western world. So building on their experience and our strong relationships with development agencies, we can take these games to the field and turn the last mile problem into a first opportunity.
Let's walk you through exactly how we'll do this. So let's take the problem of open defecation in India. There are 1 billion people who defecate in the open today. 600 million out of those are in India. Development agencies have done a lot. They've built their toilets, they've distributed those brochures and pamphlets, and yet people continue to defecate out in the open. They are suffering from the last mile problem.
So the first thing we will do is we will do a needs assessment to highlight the behavioral issues around open defecation and understand why, even with the provision of toilets, people still prefer to defecate out in the open. And this will also allow us to understand the technical landscape and adjust our distribution channels accordingly.
So let's see. So we'll be making simple mobile-based games. So here's an example of one game. Here the player is required to do one very simple thing, which is make sure that human waste drops in the toilet. So that screen will be scrolling, the toilet will be scrolling. You have to drop human waste in the toilet. The message being human waste belongs in a toilet. If the human waste falls anywhere outside of the toilet, the game throws a statistic at you. Something like, every day children drink water that has mixed with their neighbor's feces. Or, diarrhea is the 3rd largest killer of children under 5 years old. To make things really interesting, these statistics will be in the voices of local celebrities. So really engaging our beneficiaries through these games.
So then we will combine the game with an impact evaluation because we understand what our clients, the development agencies, want. They want to know that what they put their money into actually works. And it will also give us validation for future projects.
And how will we take these games to the field? The way we're going to do that is through these development projects that are going to be implemented. These games will be used as communication tools. So there are several ways we can do this. Field workers could carry them on a tablet and take them to community centers where people can play them. They can be given to school teachers, little phones to school teachers where children can play them. And amazingly, they can be transferred onto these really cheap, low-end smartphones that the community itself actually owns. So you can actually leave the games with them. And with 92% cell phone penetration in the world today, the potential to make these games reach the poorest people is immense.
So in 2013, there were 110 million people in India accessing the internet through smartphones, and Google just recently released a $100 Android smartphone in India.
And our talented coders can make games for a variety of mediums, including Android phones, web-based tablets, and desktops. So let's quickly talk about money. We plan on making money through game development, through the services that we provide on the needs assessment and evaluation, and through crowdfunding. And then we have our outflows are the cost of goods sold, which is doing these surveys, and the softwares Salaries and commissions, our core team gets salaries, but we usually commission on the basis of every project, and then marketing and business development fees. Given this, in this year, we're looking at approximately $200,000 of net revenue, but we can triple that by 2017 to $600,000 of net revenue, simply because a lot of these games can be repackaged for new clients. And therefore, if our stock is increased, then the number of clients that we have increases.
So what is the impact of one of our games? An average World Bank project reaches about 10,000 beneficiaries. So with 5 projects a year, we can reach 150,000 beneficiaries in 3 years. So what is our ask? We're asking for $35,000 to help us build our customer base. This will allow us to build demos so that our customers can touch and feel our games and understand the breadth of what we're able to offer them. It will also help us in the registration process.
Summary, we are Grid. We solved the last mile problem with games. We went from earning $15,000 to actually current projects that could be worth $500,000. We need your support to make $35,000. And we're asking for your support, and we're open to questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So, 2 questions. First question, and it's an interesting idea, but how do you think that using games will actually change folks' behavior in a local jurisdiction?
That's a really interesting question, and I think one of the things that has been tested a little bit, has been played with within the developed countries, has been this idea of games as effective behavioral learning tools and behavioral change tools. So there is empirical evidence that shows that especially amongst younger users, games can create a messaging, because they're reiterative, you keep playing the game, so they create a certain messaging value that leaves with the consumer, which a book or a pamphlet does not do.
The second question is, what is the financial model? Who are the clients and how do they pay?
So the clients are the development agencies, like the World Bank, the USAID, the UN, and the way they pay is they pay per project. So the project could either be just game development, or it could be the needs assessment, the game development, and the evaluation. So our customers, the development agencies, would be paying to have these projects have these games incorporated into their projects that they take to the field. So previously, when they were using a brochure, instead they'll take a game instead to the field this time when they're going.
So when I think of last mile, and maybe it's my narrow way of thinking about it, I think about that in a telecom context, or maybe even an internet broadband context, and maybe you're using that synonymously. So I couldn't help but think when you showed smartphones to these rural locations, I started thinking about broadband penetration. How can you gamify if you don't have a last mile signal?
That's actually a really interesting question, and I think that the World Bank itself is looking at these distribution channels. So one of the ways that this could be done is through the hardware. So actually have these games preloaded on the phones when they're distributed. Another way to do that is actually go in the field and transfer these, and this has been done before, transfer these games through Bluetooth. So, I mean, most of these people have these really low-end, cheap Android smartphones, and if you can go to the field once, which these development agencies do because they're implementing the project, you can transfer these games using Bluetooth to these phones. So Wi-Fi isn't that big a constraint, especially when there's already an infrastructure available for these development agencies to be in the field when they come out.
Are these games that are developed, considering that you have very old technology in the field, are these games simplified in terms of memory and processing speed?
Yeah. So as you saw in this demo game, it was super, super simple. All you had to do was just tap when you thought that you could aim, right? So I mean this, and that's why we've sometimes felt that our graphics aren't as fancy as Grand Theft Auto, for instance, but that's not exactly what we're aiming for either. So that's why we keep our graphics bare minimum, super simple. We do not have any back-end algorithm that captures memory of what the moves that the player makes. So none of that. It's just that game working on that feature phone at that moment.
So you told us what happens when the poop misses. What does it say when it hits?
Good going.
You did it.
Slam dunk.
Yeah, well, I like that. We might steal that.
Yeah, we might actually say that.
So the last mile problem isn't the only reason that 30% of World Bank projects are considered inefficient, or Oxfam projects, or any of that, right?
True.
To a large extent, it's because the entire theory of change is patently wrong, culturally dense, and a little imperialistic. Sometimes, politely with love to my colleagues. I come from the foundation world. We're just as bad as anybody, if not worse. So so how are you going to reconcile the fact that your clients are a fundamental market failure? Because the people you're serving, clients who are theoretically serving other people, and there's no way to get the feedback over here about whether there's even recognition of the goal. Do you know what I'm saying?
I think my way, like the way I've struggled with that because I work for the World Bank, and so yeah, I totally understand where you're coming
Jim
from.
Kim says so even, so like.
Yeah, but I think our way of doing this, addressing this, was the needs assessment. Because in our minds, I mean, one of the things that we try to do is, even before we make the game, we try and get a sense of the landscape that we're struggling with. Also, the stereotype, the example that I gave, we're trying to do a local proof of concept before we can take it internationally. So Stereowiped is one example of that, where we're implementing it with a DC-based NGO, get some feedback. Of course, it's going to be a little bit different, but at least see if it's up and running in this context, because if it doesn't work here, it's definitely not going to work there. So that's our way. I mean, we're still struggling with it, but that's our way of making an informed choice.
Can you give a 30-second about what the needs assessment, what is your needs assessment? How do you do that?
Focus groups. Go into the field, get a sense of the focus groups, get a sense of the behavioral problem, because that's what we're trying to address, and then most importantly, get a sense of the technology landscape so that we can identify the dissemination channels that are going to be implied. And then if the needs assessment is with the impact evaluation, then the impact evaluation will actually have a baseline survey. So the needs assessment kind of gets combined with that.
And I think the impact evaluation is another way to get around what you're talking about, because doing the impact evaluation, theoretically, we could just make a game and the development agency pays us for it, and then, we could just not worry about what happens to it after that. But we want to make sure that what we're producing is actually working, and, make sure that we understand what's not working about it, and we can then change it for the next, the next go around. So I think.
So there's a loop of learning.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm still curious that after I address these behaviors, this larger environment is reinforcing it how?
So I think if I understand the question correctly, they're going to be different games that are focusing on different social challenges. So if you have open defecation being addressed at one point, sexual behaviors and preventive actions from AIDS at the other hand, women empowerment, child nutrition. So it's just we didn't want to go into every game that we could make, but yeah, it's a huge canvas, and right now we're in active dialogues with just every sector, literally, where we're trying to see how games can address those gaps.
And also, I would say that some of the games previously that have been used in development projects have been a piece of the project. So they may not be the whole project. So there's other things, like community awareness events or other things going on around the game that reinforce what you're learning in the game.
Thank you.
Why don't you have a game to teach the development agencies how to poop in the non-imperialistic sweet spot?
That was a comment. Last question.
I'll ask the question. So who are your competitors? I mean, there's a million kids in garages or people creating Flappy Bird or some simplistic. Mm-hmm. So what's the competitive landscape, and how do you guys view yourself in that?
So we're not competing against people that are creating games that are, being marketed in the App Store, right? Like, that's not our clientele. And we're not competing against people like, EA Games who are making, these games for PS and all that stuff. We're, making games for a specific clientele, and there are other people in, like I was saying, in the Games for Good space, like Games for Change, the Wilson Center. So there are a couple other players out there, but really no one has kind of taken this by the horns and really done it. They've tried it and, it's kind of worked and then it kind of didn't, but then they didn't try again. So, I think it's a new field, really.
And can I just say that we have a specific client, but it's a huge client. I mean, it is a very large industry and there's a lot of room for all the things that we can do and all the games that we can make. So we're changing the world one game at a time. Thank you.